gotta buck. Gotta buck. Like the thing gotta buck. Gotta buck.
Listen, we need to slow down, right? Only fools rush in, and really take that landscape, that portrait picture, and be like, all right, what do we have and what do I need? Can I solve this myself? Or do I do the most courageous thing and ask for help? And that's not only self, because you talk about self-care, but for me, after the shooting that I was in 2017, I was going to eat my gun, but I was able to affect a self-rescue. And we need to do a better job and be proactive about taking care of our people. And that's on just the minimal calls. But when you get into that high intensity, either SWAT or shooting, robbery, whatever it is, you take the time afterwards to debrief your people. Let them know that it's okay to be emotional. Check in with your people. Know if you look at somebody's career, even mine, that throughout that career, I mean, great, getting all these great marks, and all of a sudden something happens, and he's showing up to work late, or he's sick, taking time off, something's wrong at home. We can see these things going in our officers and firefighters. We know that there are things that are happening to us, but how do we effectively connect with them and let them know it's okay, that this is the job, that it will take a toll on you? And I think, again, officer wellness, connecting with your peer support, making sure that they're educated. I mentioned earlier that we had 2 of our officers get ran over last night by 2 suspects from a robbery, and they immediately called out peer support. We've got to make this a normal thing so that we can talk about this, because if we continue down that path of not sharing or talking about our feelings and emotions, and we push them down and we numb and avoid them, it's going to blow up. And ultimately, we've got to make sure that we're valuing and investing in our people and using that self-awareness, that self-care, and having opportunities for our members to reach out and ask for help.
Thank you so much, Jared. You just introduced a term I have never heard before, and that's a self-rescue, right? We are so quick to jump in and help where we can and come out to rescue somebody else, but enacting a self-rescue. I love that you used that term. That was amazing. You also talked about the courage that it took and to normalize the emotions, because the reality is it's not normal not to have emotions. Right. But that's what we normalize is, oh, why do you, that's so weird. You have emotions to some traumatic event. Yeah, we're supposed to. We're human beings. So I love that you talked about that and the courage that it takes to step up and ask for help. I really appreciate that. Dean, I know this is huge in your world as well. Can you share with us maybe how you approach taking care of your mental health?
Sure. And I think this past year has really been an example of where we have faced a lot of challenges. And I think on the broader perspective, we went from a population of about 2,000 inmates in our 2 facilities to about 1,200. So we dropped a lot, but staff had a lot of stress. As a shift commander, I deal with a lot of staff that have serious concerns because of the inmate population. But I think the biggest concern really is what we're bringing from the outside inside, right? And that's where people get more often sick. So that's been a little challenge. I think for me, I've always strived to go attend training if at all possible. One thing that I attended a number of years ago, and some of these training I pay for my own way, and I encourage staff if they can do it. First responders conferences, I think, are really important. They have, people that are corrections, law enforcement, dispatchers, firefighters. They talk about real world situations that they've dealt with and how they've overcome those things. I think sometimes we like to keep things to ourselves, and especially from my experience, in corrections, a lot of times we don't want to share things we don't want to share too much with our coworkers. We're afraid of, we know, unfortunately, people will talk about other staff members and it gets around. So a lot of times we bottle things up. So for me, whether it's the training or reading or reaching out to, I have a number of friends that I work with away from work. We talk about things, and that gives me an opportunity to get myself straight, to make myself feel better. Because I know there are times when I've dealt with suicides in the jail or serious staff assaults that it takes a toll on me also. I'm trying to make sure the staff are okay and looking out for them, providing them resources. But it also, I don't take care of myself, then how am I going to be able to help them out also, I guess.
Thank you
So I
so
think
much, sir. And I appreciate everything you've done for me, just keeping me in line over the years too, teaching me your ways. I love the shout out to first responder conferences too, because we're constantly saying, oh, there's no really good resources out there for first responders, but no, they have really taken a lead and do conferences several times a year and provided people like Jared to come and be in the spotlight for a while. And yeah, it's a really good program. I appreciate you bringing that up. And I want to move on to our next question, and I'm going to punt this over to Tim because it's clear that with all the sports paraphernalia in the background, he is a great person for this one. How do you ensure your physical health is good, Mr. King?
Well, first of all, I'm just blessed to have a great relationship with God. I'm glad that Jared shared his story. Like him, I suffer from PTSD. And I know if it wasn't for my relationship with God, I may have taken my life. But just having an out, having a someone that you can confide in, like Dean mentioned, there's a lot of stigma that goes with mental health, and if you may confide in someone, and then next thing you know, you may be in the locker room or whatever, and you hear the whispers, and you're thinking, well, are they talking about him? Is he going to swallow his gun, or is he weak? A lot of us are from the old school. When you went to the academy, you were taught don't show fear. You're on scene, you're command presence, you take care of business, and that was in. I was blessed in my beginning of my career. I had an old school sergeant that pulled me to the side, and he said, Tim, every time you get off duty, make sure you take an hour to yourself. Put a recliner in your bedroom, and you go in there and you debrief. Unfortunately, we all have families, and sometimes you can't debrief. So take that extra route home so that when you do get home around with your family, you're okay. Because it kind of goes back to, I'm sure we all read it, the Police Officer Survival Handbook. And I think Post had a video out at one time where we make decisions for people every day because they can't make their own decisions. And so I saw a video where a guy was at a checkout stand, and the lady was asking him cash, debit or credit, and he was getting frustrated because he's made decisions all day long for people, but he just doesn't want to make that simple decision for himself now. So that in my book is what helped. I've just been blessed to be around great people, and I've been down in there, like I said, to the bottom of it, and I just know it's God that saved me. But just like this pandemic, people talk about this pandemic. This virus is something we can't see. PTSD is something you can't see. It comes through a cumulative trauma. And if you don't, like Jared said, if you don't have someone that reins you in and starts noticing the behavioral change, pull them to the side and say, hey, you know what? I recognize this, man. I can help you. If not, I can get you the help. And like what you were talking about, what your department's doing up in Washington, 2 years to prior to my retirement, our department started recognizing the need. So they started developing the peer pressure groups. And I thought that was awesome because now it takes the stigma out where someone can actually reach out and talk to something about a critical incident or something to that effect that maybe that affected them. And it doesn't have to be, like I said, a police officer. It could be a dispatcher that gets that call and they hear that lady that gets killed while they're taking the 911 call. There's all the scenarios out there. What I always done, I got this coin here, and I'm sure you guys can see. It's a challenge coin. It's out of Philippians, and especially like when I would work desks and I could see someone was really hurting or something like that, I would give them the coin. Or if I worked a baby death and it was a female officer on the scene, and females attach more to a baby more than a male would, I should say. Not saying that I didn't cry going home, because I did, but I would give them the coin to let them know, hey, God used you in that moment. This was something that you can't put a question mark on, so that they wouldn't develop that. And I would let them know, call me. I'm not going to put your business out there. So what you guys are doing is great, and I'm glad I'm hearing this repeating all over, because this is long overdue. You know, especially after investigating so many police officer suicides in in the corner division, especially my one friend. I grew up with him. We went to school. We served in church together. Watched each other kids grow. He was the last person that I would ever thought would have taken his own life. But it is very rampant in law enforcement in this, and I can't imagine now. With this lockdown, the domestic violence, the suicide rate, all the anxiety. We got kids locked up at home. They're there with their parents, and then some of the kids aren't eating because they usually get their meal from school. So I'm hoping I'm not overgoing my time, but I see you, Gabe. So um, I hope it helps, but I appreciate this, and keep it up, guys. Keep up the good fight.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up, Tim. And so much of what you're saying is about taking care of our physical machine, right? This is the one thing that we have. And even those little acts of processing the emotion, or, those small tokens or conversations with our peers are huge in maintaining that. We also have joining us Officer Moses Robinson out of New York with a peace be to us all. I appreciate you being here, sir. I'm going to kick this over to you. Because I can feel it coming through the screen already. What do you do to ensure that you are spiritually well?
Listen, brother, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Well, listen, first and foremost, giving honor to the Creator God of all. That's one of the things. I mean, come on, my name is Moses, right? go figure that, right? How did you grow up with a name like Moses and be a devil? Anyway, but giving credit to God for everything in my life, and that means that I generally try to start my day with giving God the first hour. I mean, clearly giving a spiritual time, acknowledging the fact that I'm a very spiritual human being. And that as I've gotten older, I realized the health and wellness for me through meditation, and meditation is a part of prayer. So we understand this. Meditation and prayer as a result of balance. Because once we walk out that door, at least I do as a police officer, let alone just a human being, we're going to face challenges that I feel that I face every day, and dealing with other people's problems and situations. So because of the role that I'm in, and I am the community liaison officer for the Rochester Police Department, and that significance of itself in terms of trying to bring two communities that are angry with each other right now. The police department in terms of how they feel they're being seen, and the community in terms of how they feel they're being dealt with. Blessed are the peacekeepers, because that's who we are. And so we can't peace keep if we don't have peace in us. And that is very, very, for me, that's very serious. So for me, in order to have that, I give that few minutes every morning, acknowledging the Creator, acknowledging God, who's probably called by many names with all due respect, but I call him God, So therefore, that's what I feel is important for me, to keep that balance.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I love that you've ritualized it. It's something that you can repeat on a daily basis. It's not here or there when it's, oh, I feel down today. So this is something that you've ingrained into your daily life. I was talking with somebody recently who was really struggling with that because of their non-religious beliefs. And the conversation was shifted to, there is a spiritual element regardless of what your religious belief is. Do you believe in the nobility of what you do? Do you believe in purpose? Do you believe in ethics? What are those things? And anybody can take that first hour and reflect on those things, or any time in the morning, and ritualize those. And just like you've done, put them into their daily practices. Wow. I just had a good feeling that you would be able to answer that question for us, Moses. Appreciate you joining
Well, it didn't have anything to do with my name, Moses.
us. I know. I guess maybe I'm not so intuitive.
Yeah, brother. You know, I just want to share because of what we're talking about with every brother here listening. And this is very emotional because, like many of you brothers, I have experiences, close relationships, and in some cases, undetected stress on some of the brothers that we work with who decided that the only way for them to um, to escape the pain that they were in was to commit, suicide.
Yeah.
And I just want to share with all of you who are listening that you may share with all of those who will listen. If you know the scriptures, whether it's Abraham and the sacrifice that God asked him to make, Cain and Abel with the sacrifice that God asked them to make. So, therefore, all I want to say is this: Satan, or the evilness of our thoughts, comes through our disappointments. When we feel that we want something and we don't get it, there becomes the thought, the anger, the disappointment, and the process of either growth because we're learning that we don't get everything we want, but we go to go to God for that understanding, or we decide that we know more than God, and that the test that has begun is, why didn't we get it? So that becomes for us our disappointment that we have to be careful of, that we seek answers to the disappointment and realize this is the ultimate test that we're going through, whether it's a divorce, whether it's our children, whether it's personal things in our lives. And I'm going to tell you right now, I am actually going through this very thing right now. And so I'm reminding myself of my words as I speak this, that this is actually my challenge at this very moment.
Well, it's so great that you're willing to open up about that, and I'd really love to get the panel to weigh in on this, because this is a very real thing. So when we do have a staff member who does um, take their own life, or what's our response to that? I'd love to get Jared's thoughts on this.
So, whew, having colleagues die by suicide and myself wanting to eat my gun, I always looked at it as a cowardice act where how could you, right? Shame on you, that shame that loves the darkness. And when I was at my darkest time, that became the most viable option. I wanted it to stop hurting. Tim had mentioned earlier about solving problems. We solve people's problems every day. And the scariest thing is I couldn't solve my problem. I didn't know what was wrong with me. My life was unmanageable. And that's why I was like, well, I'm going to end this because I am too afraid to admit that I'm hurting. And that is the stigma we've got to smash. Amen. To save their lives. And what I realized that when I asked for help and went to residential treatment for PTSD, that it's a brain injury. It's something that happens to me because of this job. It's not my fault. And that trauma is treatable. And with looking through that lens of hope, man, it set a fire in me that when I left treatment, oh, bro, you better watch out. Because when I went back to my department, I'm like, I had a gift. I had a gift of life. I won my life back. And I wanted to share that message. Tim mentioned it, and so did you, Ian, about the first responder conferences. They reached out to me, and I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And one of the benefits that I see, because remember, when I share my trauma, it takes a lot out of me, right? My body
Yes.
those trauma, and it knows it's about to happen, and it's real and it's raw and it's powerful. And that's where you connect with me, right? I'm that credible messenger. I speak the language. And that's where you're like, okay, I see myself in Jared, or I've been there, or man, I don't ever want to get to that spot. How do I prevent that? This is how you prevent it. When you are yourself, right? We go to these calls, we see this, a partner, whatever that looks like. We've got to be able to normalize that and talk about it, right? Growing up, third generation law enforcement, former Marine, SWAT cop, canine, we don't talk about that, right? That's the only way we are going to help each other out, realistically, because I was surviving, I wasn't living, and we all swear the oath to this noble profession to serve and protect. Remember, we have to protect each other mentally and physically so that we can go home to our families. We can enjoy our retirement, right? So that's the power right there, is that when you can normalize that you are going to see things that you and the human being should not see, we have to make sure that people realize that it's okay and that there's help out there, and not shame those people that do.
Thank you so much. I always appreciate your vulnerability, man. This is exactly what it's going to take for, I think, our profession to take a step forward. Is just that massive leap of courage, to have these conversations and then to do something about them. We also have joining us my friend as of a couple days ago, George Chavez. I don't want you to crash, sir, but I know that this is an important topic to you. Is there a way you can weigh in on this particular topic? What we're talking about is when a staff member takes their own life, how do we deal with it? Not only personally, but how do we check ourselves, check our teams?
Yeah, to follow up on what, with these time differences and everything, I thought we were at 11 Hawaii time, so that works out to 3 o'clock here in the Midwest. So I apologize for hopping on late. It's interesting. You're listening to a couple of people share some stories and vulnerability, and what I would ask people is, give me a word that describes those people right now. Give me a word that describes everything that they shared, right? And what comes to mind is strength, courage, perseverance. And I think what's interesting is that we can see that in others, but when we start to look at vulnerability within ourselves, we see it as a weakness, right? So we got to turn that around. We've got to be able to do that. When we're talking about, people who take their lives, I think what's interesting to me is that now being prior law enforcement for 32 years and becoming a chaplain, I find that law enforcement at times will struggle with people from the outside, right? I mean, we have EAP, we have chaplains who come in who have little or no law enforcement experience, and that becomes a hurdle. So for me, I'm blessed because I can bridge a little bit of that gap, because I sit down with people. We recently lost a detective here this past year and had another one attempt to take his life. And so it was just on my heart. God put it on my heart to come in and say, George, stop by your precinct, your old precinct. And I did. And I stopped in and had a conversation with people. And it was interesting to listen to the questions, right? Because as everybody has talked about, how did we not see that? We see it in everybody else. We when we go to calls of people who have taken their lives, we hear that from others going, I didn't even know there was anything wrong. For us in that profession, because we do that on a daily basis, we really struggle because we're trying to go, how did I not know? How did I not see this? How did I not know it was happening, right? So you start to develop feelings of guilt. Because you didn't acknowledge, or you just weren't in tune with it. And so I'm having this conversation with about 20 officers, and they're going, George, I'm even worried about, what if that's me? What if that's me? And those are all legitimate feelings, right? They are all legitimate feelings. What was interesting is we're talking about all of this. The EAP rep walks in and everybody shuts down.
Yep.
Right. And so I think there's a couple things when we're dealing with officer involved suicides and things that I've taken note of, and I'd love to hear from other people in the panel. I remember when I first started in law enforcement back in 1984, you would often hear, well, not even often, it was occasionally you'd hear of an officer committing suicide, but they would go to a different place, to a different county, so that nobody they knew would be the one who found them. And it was a little different feel, right? And then it started to evolve a little bit where officers, later on in my career started to take their life at home, mostly when nobody was there at first. But then that started to change where loved ones were starting to find them and loved ones were starting to come across them. One thing I've noticed as of today, law enforcement officers are taking their lives in the parking lots of departments. And I'm asking myself, they're sending a message. Why are we not listening? Why are we not picking up on this? Right? Their focus is something that went on with the department. And I see somebody else has something to say about that. So I'm curious as to if others are seeing that as well, because it's very concerning.
I know Moses has something.
It's really interesting you say that, brother. And not just interesting that you say that. It's like we do a lot of forensic studies. We do a lot of analytical studies. And I remember one day, years ago, I was watching this program at HBO that talked about suicide. And you just said something that jumped out at me that I remember from this HBO special. And it was stated in the HBO documentary on suicide that people who commit suicide do it in a place where the people they feel wrong them or hurt them can find them.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's unbelievably powerful.
Yes. So if it's a wife or something that happened at home, who's going to find it? If it's a kid, now think about that. They're doing it in their room because they're angry with their parents. The person that they're angry with, what it seems like to me that they were saying, the people that they were angry with is where they commit the act, so the act will be found by them.
Absolutely. And I don't know about the rest of the panel, but I feel that law enforcement is somewhat unique as opposed to like service. So being in the military as well, service trauma can be an event, and not that it can't be numerous events, but for law enforcement, you're talking about a cumulative trauma over 25, 30 years. Yeah. So there are things that I learned. And one of the things that I've been blessed to do is to have a counselor who was a faith-based counselor who worked in brain spotting. And I don't know how many have ever done brain spotting. And I swear by it. It unlocked a bunch of trauma that I had forgotten. I went in and just to share quickly, I went into a session, asking myself, am I acting out of control or am I acting out of care? Right. I mean, that's a question I had because in my relationships, I would hear, you're very controlling. And not that doesn't happen, because I think law enforcement, we're very controlling anyways, right? We're told to control a situation, control people's movements. So why would that not carry over into your personal relationship? But, I'm asking myself, am I acting out of control or care? And so I did this brain spotting to figure that out. And if you've ever done it, it's like HGN, and you wear a headset that's got different sounds, nature sounds, music, light music coming in. And the HGN, it's following this pen, and you reach a point, and this point kind of unlocks some of the things that you've kept in your mind. And it just shocked me because once we got to this spot, I broke down. And this is after retirement, guys. That's the other thing, right? I mean, I think that retirement, everybody's like, I'm going to cruise, I'm going to hit the beach, I'm going to do all that stuff. Sorry to tell you that trauma is going to come with you. It's at some point it's got to be released. So we reach this point and I'm all of a sudden in tears. I am like uncontrollably crying. I'm in air conditioned and my back is soaked from sweating. And the person administering this says, so tell me what's coming up. What's coming up into your mind? And I went back to my first infant autopsy. Hadn't thought about that in over 25 years. Right. And so I'm like, what's going on? I don't know. I'm asking the therapist, what's happening here? And she's saying, well, your body's finally getting to experience what it wanted to experience. And I said, I remember telling myself, it's not real. It's a doll. It's not real. All of a sudden she goes, okay, keep going with that. Next thing I go to is a funeral of my best friend in 3rd grade. And I'm standing next to the casket looking at my dad, and I'm telling my dad that my best friend doesn't look real. I had no idea that, telling myself that the doll wasn't real and that my friend, when I was in 3rd grade, I hadn't even dealt with that trauma, that is already happening. And then I followed that up and kept going. And I don't know how many of you, I'm an old school kid. So my dad was pretty heavy handed and pretty strong with the belt. And I remembered my dad after he had hit me saying something. And I said, I don't remember. It's not coming up that I've been hit, but what's coming up time and time again is hearing this. You better stop crying or I'm going to give you something to cry about.
Yeah.
Many of you have heard that.
Yeah. Hey, George, you've already unpacked something that I think a lot of people are going to want to know more about. So I'm going to ask, because all of you are such great resources, all the discussion, you guys, it's probably pretty clear why I had to share a virtual space with these panelists. These guys are amazing. But this last question is so big that I wanted to save it till the end here. Say a staff member, as you know, happens quite often, a staff member seriously assaulted or injured on the job. What do, you or your agency or what do you do to ensure they're okay mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally? What do we do for them? So
currently for staff, when there's some serious incident that happens in the facility, we have our critical incident stress management. We have trained officers that meet with the individuals, talk about resources, talk about how they're doing, and all that's confidential, right? And I think most staff realize that and they accept that. We mentioned, I heard earlier about EAP. Some people are hesitant about EAP, but obviously I'm going to present that and let them know that that's an option also. I'm part of a nonprofit. It's called the Jack Persons Brian Fisher Memorial. And it's 15th year we've had it, and it's a annual motorcycle ride and then a fundraiser. We try to provide resources to correctional officers and also law enforcement throughout the state. And we've been able to do that over a number of years. Myself and Officer Virgil Batista, who was on the panel but is not here today, is part of the steering committee for that group. So that's some of the things, being involved, letting staff know that there are resources available. There are people to talk to them, to support them. We had a recent one just 2 weeks ago, and fortunately staff weren't, the near assault, and staff had to actually basically run away from the individual, and then we got the person under control. I brought the staff in to talk to them. And I'm a really easygoing guy. I think I'm very low key. 2 of the staff members I talked to, they were worried about losing their jobs after I talked to them. And that's not the way I come across. And they went to other staff members and said, oh, I'm afraid the captain, after I talked to them, I'm concerned about my job. And these are people that have job less than a year. So that concerned me a little bit. How did my conversation, trying to be supportive and say, hey, how are you doing? Obviously, I need reports, right? But I try to low key that, that's the least thing I'm concerned about right now. How are you doing? Even trying to be very supportive, they still were very concerned about what's going to happen with me. Is there something I did wrong? I said, no, you didn't do anything wrong. The inmate that was attacking them, that was on them. You defended yourself, you protected yourself. So, so that can be very challenging as far as being supportive and letting them know, yeah, because a lot of times I hear individuals saying the department doesn't care. If an inmate complains about something, the staff have to write a report about what happened. and they're concerned about. We're always staff feel that they're being considered guilty. And the inmates lying is sometimes we come across. So just trying to be supportive for the staff, I guess, is the biggest thing.
You, Tim. I love that. Thank you. How about you, Tim?
I actually have a personal story besides not being, outside of being a watch commander, but the reason why I was removed from gangs is I ended up getting green lighted by the Mexican mafia. So my son, who was a deputy at the time, was working in the ADSEC unit where one of the MA associates that I was testifying against was working at. So my son they couldn't get to me because the department moved me to the training division. So they went after my son twice. Well, thankfully, he's a big football player and he handled business. But I wanted to be able to go talk to him, father to son, and just let him know you didn't do nothing wrong. Administration's going to back you as long as you didn't use excessive force. And I just wanted to make sure he was safe and not to play the big guy with me. But anybody that I've always been around that's either been in it, and we all been around, especially not only someone in force, but then you get the people that get the tunnel vision, and you got to learn to tap them on the shoulder to pull them out of it so that they don't get into the use of force, especially now with all the cameras and stuff like that. Like on patrol now we have body cameras, and then the jails have cameras. So the way I would always do was just approach them as a person first. If they asked me, if they wanted me to, I would take my uniform off and just say, hey, it's just me and you, no command staff. How do you feel? Do you need to be treated? And, because I didn't want the long-term effect.
Really appreciate that. Jared, mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally, how do we take care of our brothers and sisters?
We have to be proactive. We are so reactive on everything we do in law enforcement and first responders. We have to do a better job of making sure that our supervisors, our frontline supervisors, have connections and contacts immediately with your peer support, that you can call them out. And I know that the captain was talking about meeting with his people, and I cringed. And the reason I say that is that because I'm certified in the CISM and the group and the individual. It's got to be peer-to-peer, cannot have any admin involved. And I know you're just trying to help, but the fear is, and experience this, I know what the criminal's going to do. I am so afraid of what the admin's going to do, right? So we've got to do a better job of educating, being proactive, sending our people to training, getting our peer support off on board. You mentioned EAP. You want to talk about cringeworthy? I have fielded so many calls, and this is what I love about not only sharing this message of hope with you, this panel, and as I travel, is that I want to let people know that no matter how dark the darkness gets, it doesn't matter how far you've fallen, you are not alone. And the scariest feeling that I had was that I was alone.
Appreciate you saying that. And wasn't it a chaplain who was kind of your first step in that process of?
Yes. So when I finally had the courage, because my wife was a cop who was also involved in a shooting, again, you look at my background, I'm thinking, I can't let anybody know that I'm suffering the way I'm suffering. And when I reached out to a retired cop who was our chaplain, as well as our party support, peer support, I said, I need help. But then I was like, the lie I tell myself, the lies we tell ourselves, give me like 3 or 5 days. I don't need a 30-day, right? I'm not that messed up, is the lie we tell ourselves. But yes, I was able to make a connection, and then they were able to get me to the resources. Because realistically, somebody even mentioned it, we are so unique, right? We are our own worst enemy. We make it so hard for you to get into us, right? And once you're a part of us, you're a part of us. But man, it is really, really scary to talk to each other about that. It is so scary that we would much rather eat our gun than to talk to somebody. And I'm telling you right now, man, it's got to end. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is to know that it's okay, and that there are people out there that speak our language and that are going to get them the help that they need and deserve. And when people come to me and I send them to treatment, I have to not only trust the people when they come to me, trust them to send them to treatment or what that looks like, but believe in them, because people, it's life or death. When that person gets that moment of clarity, we have a very small window of opportunity to get them the help they need. Because if not, they'll be like, it wasn't, no, I'm not that messed up. And I've seen it. I saw with a SWAT brother of mine who was actually involved in a shooting and pulled the trigger with me. And I cannot, it's been 3 years now, and I cannot get him to treatment. And he is hurting every day. His wife, who's also a cop, is hurting. He's drinking. He's got anger issues. People, we see it all day long. The problem is, and one of you guys mentioned, he's like, well, what do we do when we see a brother that's hurting? How do we approach it? That's a scary thing to do, right? But you have to approach it tactfully, professionally, with heart. Listen, brother or sister, you're hurting. How can I help? Right? Don't try to solve their problem. That's not what they want, right? Be there. Hold that safe space for them and let them know they're not alone. Far too often we talk about solving problems, man, you're only going to compound the issue. You speak from the heart. Okay.
I love that. And when you brought up, chaplain, George was smiling ear to ear, and we've got to wrap up real quick. So closing thoughts, George.
Yeah, I think that what was wonderful is that share, and one thing I would suggest is that having a safe place. What does that mean? As a chaplain, I can be a safer place than somebody in admin, and sometimes even safer than a partner, right? Because if we're struggling and we go to a fellow worker, coworker, and we say, I'm struggling, the end result could possibly be some time off. And sometimes I learned that, and I was the same way, is that you find your identity in what you do, right? Mm-hmm. But God is where our identity is for me now. And I'm in such a better place for that. But again, being able to go to a safe place is critical. And I would just share, think about cultivating your circle. We call it a circle in law enforcement. Sometimes we're our worst enemies. Sometimes it's definitely good to connect with other law enforcement officers, but it's also better too at times to have connections outside of law enforcement. My men's group that I meet with are people from all walks of life. I feel I would have been more comfortable sometimes talking to them than talking to other law enforcement folks, because you might say something and somebody takes it out of context, and the next thing you know, you're sitting in a captain's office and they're talking about taking you off the street, which is where you find your identity, which is what was, again, now they're taking away something. They're not adding to, they're taking away. So they're not providing something, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. And real quick, because I do not mess with Gabe Morales. Tim, if you could just take a minute.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback real quick on what George said. When you get called in and the administration compiles the problem, because now, all right, you're dealing with something, and now they're taking your livelihood, what you portrayed yourself to be, which outside of that, you're a child of God first. But you work so hard to do that. And what I just like to tell everybody is if you see someone, I always offer to take them off site. Let's go have lunch somewhere and just talk to them. And like I tell myself every day, and Jared, I'm with you, brother. My prayers are with you. And I just tell myself every day, greater is he in me than he is in the world. And just live that. And I'm just grateful to meet every one of you here today. It's good to see you, George, wherever you, oh, there you are. I haven't seen you since Madison, But keep up the good fight and stay strong, Jared. And peace be with you all.
Blessings, my brother. Appreciate that.
Thank you guys so much. Yeah, this has been a real humbling experience, and it gives me hope moving forward that our industry is moving in the right direction. I want to punt this over to Gabe, and appreciate you having all of us on here, sir.
Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. I think it was a really good, this is our very first online training, believe it or not. So I think it was pretty good. We had a couple time difference confusions, a couple people who had to bow at the last minute for good reasons. But I think it was pretty good. I hope the people who heard this session also think it was pretty good, and we appreciate it. We have more lined up in February, March, April, and May, possibly June if people enjoy it enough. So we appreciate Ian being the moderator and all of our panelists today. It's good seeing you guys again, and we'll be in touch soon. Be safe, everybody.